Okay.
Okay, what Ken and I will do today, first of all, we'd like to introduce and welcome everybody to our podcast. And this will be the second follow-up, or it'll be the basic follow-up of the previous podcast we had. And we spoke on the topic of communication. Now, we will expand on this particular topic today. And we'd like to mention something on the side too that deals with the format and how we carry on our conversation. Both Ken and myself are practitioners of meditation, and we find that one of the benefits of meditation is to clear the mind and to gain more clarity and insight uh, on many different levels. So, what we will do today, as we've done before, but I just want to really make things really more defined and to clarify, is that we'll have a little bit of, we'll have a few timeouts where I will say, let's take 30 seconds to clear our mind. So the meditation will be approximately from 30 seconds to 1 minute. And since we both practice the meditation, there is an energy, and we encourage you to follow us along the 30-second to 1 minute meditation, as well as when you have the podcast, let's say a week from today, you can actually view the podcast again and again engage in the meditation, because there is a very interesting effect, sort of a residual or imprint effect. And we see that this is very prominent today in terms of consciousness and meditation, gaining popularity. So we think this is one way where we can learn to build a more solid foundation in terms of how we conduct ourselves, in society, how it helps ourselves engage in our family, our workplace, and the problems that we encounter. And as you know, we're encountering a lot of problems at this time. We have Hurricane Milton hitting the coast, and this impact is going to be very, very eventful. We have the election coming up, so there's a lot of things that we're facing right now that we think that we need more in terms of mental fortitude and mental clarity and peace. So again, let's start with the conversation. Before we do so, I'd like again to take about 30 seconds to clear our mind. So I would say begin, and when the session is over, I would say finish, and then we will go add into the conversation. Okay, ready? And begin. Okay, finish. Now, we may have touched upon this in the previous podcast, but basically, what we'll do today, we'll do more of a breakdown. Now, in terms of our communication, a lot really entails on how we approach and engage in terms of a conversation. So it depends on our mindset before the conversation actually begins. So we think from the energy that we're dealing with today and sort of the tenseness and the apprehension that we carry with us every day, because it's a very stressful time, it's a very stressful society. The best mindset to have is one of relaxation and a one of open-mindedness. That regardless of how a person expresses their opinion or what opinion they may have, they have the right to have that opinion, and we should be accepted or whatever. So this sort of sets a precedent in how we approach communicating with people. Even sometimes when you approach that open-mindedness, with just greeting the person, saying, "How are you doing? How's your day going? Hello, good morning." It sets a certain energy imprint or direction in terms of the openness that we express ourselves. So again, the mindset prior to our engaging a person in terms of communication is very important. And Ken, do you have anything that you would like to add to that? Any insight?
Um, no, I would say that, well, I say no, but I mean yes. Uh, I'm finding it fascinating, a couple of things. This is not coincidental, but I didn't plan this. It just, it's one of those happy accident things that happened today. I happened to get in and start looking at some news feeds from one coming from Russia, from one of the independent stations that's now been shut down, but they managed to get their broadcasts up on YouTube. I also saw same thing from China. And this is very fascinating. It speaks to all this about communication. One of the things that's going on is that, you know, younger Chinese folks just getting out of college for the last couple of years have been very frustrated and have had a really tough time because the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, doesn't seem to really intervene in corruption and things that are going on in that country. So one of the things that happens is these kids get out of college and they get these jobs, and these are more like the high-tech jobs, the computer jobs, the technology, the bigger paying jobs, and they're expected, there's a Chinese phrase for it, I don't remember offhand, but where they're expected to work 6 days a week, 12, maybe 14 hours a day, and they never know for sure when they're going to get paid. And obviously they get rather angry and rather frustrated. So back a few years ago, an internal movement started. Now, this is all about communication, right? So the movement has dumbfounded the CCP because that movement is called Bailan, and it means let it rot. And what they mean by that is that they're not going to participate in this kind of stuff anymore. They're not going to get in there and work all those hours for free or not knowing when they're going to get paid. And scores and scores, I mean high numbers of younger Chinese educated folks are refusing to stay on these jobs. So they're communicating and they're protesting generally in pretty passive ways by simply not participating in the system that's not working anymore. So what they'll do is some of them will literally just kind of lay down on a sidewalk, maybe in front of the building where they were working, and they don't hurt anyone, or some get pretty vocal and are standing out in the street yelling and they have a little trouble with the police. But generally this is like a communication through passive action. And from what I can see on the reports in the news is that the Chinese government doesn't really know what to even do about this. They've always been able to stop these kinds of things in the past, but it's so huge and they're getting so desperate for these younger folks to work because, oddly enough, they have a population issue. When 44 years ago, they started the whole process of telling people to just have one child. And even though they still have tons of people in the country, they don't have enough for what they need. And now they have a lot of people refusing to go into the big jobs and work the hours. So I find it fascinating how effective this movement is, and then it's communicating by passive action rather than civil unrest and violent stuff. I mean, the most violent thing I've seen in any of the news clips have just been some people being carried off just because they're being real vocal out in the street, and that's not a country where you can usually get away with openly criticizing the government. But they seem to be shocked, so much so that Xi Jinping is virtually crying out to the people to please, work. And I guess there's just too many people involved in this. We're in the millions here of people doing this type thing. So I just wanted to make this point that these things are starting to get very interesting, and how this reminds me of Gandhi in a sense, peaceful protesting through passive actions and not through force. And you also have something going on in Russia. I saw one of their independent news networks that managed to do a broadcast. 25 million people a day on average were watching these broadcasts on this independent station, because here again, you have a communist country where the government is telling people what to think, and yet you have these little independent news sources that'll pop up, and they're painting a different picture to the population. So now, apparently, the population in Russia is getting very divided, and starting, a lot of folks are backing off on supporting this whole nonsense thing of him attacking Ukraine, and they're having tougher and tougher time getting people to fight in it. A lot of these guys, they hit the battlefield, and the first chance they get, they cross over to the Ukrainian side and refuse to fight the Ukrainians. Some of them even join the Ukrainian army, to help repel the attacks. And I find these movements fascinating and powerful because it's people communicating through actions, not just words, and showing the power of peaceful unity and resisting through their non-participation in any of the violent stuff going on. So this is big, and this is really huge right now, particularly in these parts of the world. The Russians are getting so desperate, they now have North Koreans that are fighting in Russia. That's recent news to me. I don't know how long that's been going on. I'm thinking not terribly long. So this is something that, like I said, this goes back and reminds me of the power of how Gandhi functioned, many years ago, this type of communication. Because when it's one-sided and it's the authoritarians that are communicating all the time and the other folks are just being forced to listen and try to go along, this shows me a sign on a huge world level that folks are not going to take this anymore. And when people do this, these Chinese kids simply lie down, what are you going to do? If you throw them in prison, are they going to go to their job? No. If you beat them, are they going to go to the job? No. If you kill them, they're sure not going to work. So where does this leave you? Some point here, you're going to have to listen and change things because nothing's going to happen.
We're in a good flow right now, Ken. And you know what? I think the question to ask, because what you brought out is very important, and it is communication is not limited to spoken word.
Right.
It's in the behavior, it's in the action, the actual behavior that you conduct in order to convey what you want. Let's ask a question, and then we're going to take a 30-second, meditation real quick. What are they communicating? Think about that for a second. Without answering right now, we're going to meditate just for 30 seconds and let information flow. But what is the communication? What is the message of the communication? Okay, let's take a time out, 30 seconds. Okay, ready, begin. Okay, finish. Okay, I'm gonna offer something, and then can you express on your end? But to me, what comes to me is that what they're communicating is that the old ideology will not work. It cannot work anymore, and we're going to show you by refusing to cooperate with this ideology. We need to have a new president set into place that's going to build the country from the very foundation all the way up. So the old heads have to, like I said, give way to the new heads coming in. Okay.
Yeah, that's what popped in my head was change and evolution, and that they're refusing to accept anything but that. I watch a lot of I don't want to call them pirated, but a couple of guys who lived in China for 17 years, and they managed to record a lot of things going on in that country. And neither one of them live there anymore, but they still have access, and they still get recordings made by folks that they befriended there. And it's really a shame what that country tries to communicate is happening there, and versus what's really going on. Not just with this Bailan movement, but also with when you get away from what you usually see on YouTube that the CCP approves of, which is the cities that have been updated and revolving and look more modern. You just got to go a couple miles into the countryside And it's a completely different story. I mean, you see poverty, you see people functioning, they might be wearing more modern clothing, but they're functioning probably like they did 50 years ago or 80 years ago. It's their whole system is really breaking down fast. And we're seeing this here too in the US. We're seeing this everywhere. Like you just said, these old models aren't working anymore and they are starting to implode. Their own energy is making them implode. They're trying to force these ways of doing things and ways of seeing things to continue to function, and they simply don't. They just don't. People's minds can't even follow that stuff anymore. So they can't participate if they want to. That's how I see it.
Yeah, that structure, that way of thinking has brought us to where we are today with so much imbalance, so few having so much and so many having so little that you cannot sustain that type of ideology.
Yeah.
It creates weaknesses within your structure, within your society, even within your economy. It creates weaknesses. And what will happen is that it will, if it doesn't implode, it's going to explode. Okay. Think of where we would be at today if we were able to go back in time and erase the wars that happened in the last 150 years and took that income, those resources, and
Oh,
focused them on disease, transportation. Oh my God, we probably would be almost interstellar at this point, be able to go out, and explore other planets by now. We would be a lot of times, disease free, at least 90% of all the illnesses, right?
mm-hmm.
So it's just the fact that we have that fear component that we want to separate and have those who have and those who have not, and think we can keep that ideology going. But that system is breaking down now. Now, when you think about in terms of communication, you're going to have both sides. You're going to have the old school, the new school, and the possible friction between the two.
Yeah.
So I think what we started off with in terms of meditation, in terms of keeping a relaxed and open mind, is to be able to develop a clarity of mind where you can stick to your principle without becoming emotionally involved. Because once you get emotionally involved, you want to fight back. You want to create, uh, you create envy, hatred, anger, whatever. But if they can maintain that movement without resorting to, the emotional content, I mean, emotional in terms of destructive, emotion, they would inevitably succeed. They can only succeed because the country needs them, and they don't know actually how to even, change in any way, how to change their attitude, how to rectify the situation.
So then think about this. So, right. Uh, so now we have all this extreme weather, and the science reason for it is, global warming, which it's obvious that's happening. All you got to do is look at pictures of glaciers, even in North America, go back. Wow, you go back 50 years and then compare to now. I mean, it's just real obvious. But you also start thinking about the energetics of all these things that are going on, like these massive storms, like what's been going on down south lately. And you have to think about what kind of energy comes from humans that feed into that.
Mhm.
I mean, this stuff is extreme. They're thinking about adding category 5 used to be the highest category for a hurricane. Now they're thinking they're going to have to create a 6 to be able to explain the ferocity and an intensity and strength of the one that's hitting tonight. So, I think sometimes, I mean, we're all energy, right? We talk about this all the time. You've been talking about it for years. I have to think that that's part of what's causing all this. These catastrophes are also caused by this buildup of energy. Man, it's in the atmosphere, and some people think I'm crazy saying this, but others will go, no, no, I get it. So, uh, I think that's just going to continue, and I won't be too surprised if this world gets its act together before anything too catastrophic happens on a giant, large scale. I think that stuff will start to settle down. I really do.
Yeah, like I say, it really depends on our resilience and our focus. and our desire to have a better environment, a better world, a more productive world, the type of world where everyone has an opportunity. Education isn't restricted to just a few. Economic success is not, restricted to just a few. We won't have the extremes like people being dependent on wealth, having so much that they become so attached to it that they forget about the personal happiness. That's more important than what you may possess. So we take that imbalance and we bring it back. So I applaud, everyone, in Russia, in China, and in other places that are going through this revolution. It's called a revolution of the soul. But in terms of what you just brought up, a very important statement. There is an old Indian sage that made a statement. It says the change that we're going through, the transition that we're going through, is dependent on energy. Either we have the storm within us, or the storm will happen outside of us. So we're seeing a storm externally happen outside of us. Until we get our act together, the more we get our act together, these storms will subside. So that's the whole ideal of the synergy that that we're going through, and that was.
The other thing I didn't mention, because I think it's a bit different situation, but it's still connected, is all the stuff going on in the Middle East too, obviously, I mean, that's a little different situation. A lot of that's been going on for a very, very, very long time. And what I can't figure out is how the way that everybody seems to try to solve that there is, okay, well, you blow up a bunch of ours, we're going to blow up a bunch of, it's that same old thing, like the Iranians fired 140 major, huge missiles into Israel. And as far as I know, only one person ever actually even got killed, and it was not an Israeli citizen.
Hmm.
And so to me, that's like an act of desperation. They don't even know what to do anymore. So here again, we see this, all the missiles flying and people getting blown up through their pagers and all this crazy stuff happening. And how does anybody think that any of that ends anything? It seems so absurd now. We've seen it with all the wars we've talked about. It's like, okay, your side blows up a bunch of people in one of our cities, so now we retaliate. And so the anger and the revenge motive just continues to breed itself. It just keeps happening again and again and again and again and again. And yet nobody sits there and says, well, I guess we better try something different. It's locked into their psyches.
It shows you how strong of an influence culture has.
Yeah,
It's so deeply embedded in culture
sure.
that they have this revenge factor that they can't let go of. You attack me, I have to retaliate, and on from generation to generation.
Yep.
So there will be some people, for instance, the youngsters or the people in China, they're waking up soon. But the people in the Middle East, perhaps, they have to wake up a little bit later. They have to endure more suffering until they finally realize what you just stated, that this is insane. That we can't keep, we're setting ourselves back into the Stone Age.
Yeah.
Because not only are you destroying lives, you're destroying the economy, you're destroying part of your infrastructure. You have to rebuild everything.
Sure.
You see? So you can't take, one step forward and take three steps back and expect to make progress, right? But there
Yeah.
will be people that will wake up later. But the thing is that those that wake up early, I think, in terms of the love and compassion for mankind, they will reach out a hand and help those who are actually stuck in it. At least you offer to help. But just by example, they're showing that it can be done. You can change the system from within. But I think that they will change. It's just unfortunate that they have to keep suffering until they wake up and say, we're done with this.
Yeah. Yeah. Otherwise, it's just the same energy over and over again. So the same thing just keeps happening where it's not going anywhere. It's just keep feeding into the same mechanisms, if you want to call it that. And what else are you going to get, but the same thing?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, they said the next stage in human evolution is a stage of consciousness development. The raising of our consciousness. Some people refer to it as the raising of our vibration of our consciousness, because once we raise it, we'll understand how we're all one. We're close to 7 billion people on this planet, we can't afford to exclude anyone because if the world is too tight now. What happens in one place has an effect on the other. We can't, afford to think that we can think in a separatist way. So we have to learn how to hold hands and then work together so that eventually, we can be able to leave this planet once we learn the lessons and build something, better someplace else because the planet is not here infinite to hold, 7 billion people.
I think that's what Elon Musk is up to, trying to get us to Mars and start to colonize and figuring we're going to blow this one up. So maybe we have to go to, what you just said fit in perfectly with something I was going to bring up. And I'm thinking this could be something great for our next talk. I happened to stumble on an article in the Scientific American. A guy named Scott Kaufman, did an article, and the title is, "What would happen if everyone truly believed that everything is one?" And this is a pretty, now, that's a science-based journal, of course, and it's pretty fascinating what comes out of this, and it fits perfectly with what you just said, what has to happen. So, this is just another example of science is looking at this too. They're seeing something here. And this article talks about what happens, because the thing we're still stuck in, as you know, is we're still stuck in my religion can beat up your religion and all that old stuff. And that's still a lot of what's going on in the Middle East, of course, but we've got to evolve past that. Here, I'll mention one thing that he says right up front in here. This is an Albert Einstein quote, where Albert Einstein said, "We experience ourselves, our thoughts and feelings as something separate from the rest. It's a kind of optical delusion of consciousness."
Hmm.
So that's pretty good. I'll save everything else from this for next time, but I think it'll tag in with what we just talked about. You just said it that led me to bring this up real quick.
Yeah, that would be a perfect topic to bring up on the next podcast. What will happen? What will be the effect if we did, as a whole, collectively, thought that everything is one, that we're all one? Because I have a lot of things metaphysical to add in on that, and I know you have a lot of things to add in on that. Maybe that will be 1 to 2, maybe even 3 podcasts to actually expand on, because it's something
Yeah.
that's so talked about now from so many different people, from so many different fields. So yeah, let's make that the official topic for the next.
Yeah, and I think you're right. There could be several sessions on this because I think one of the things that can and should come out of that probably would be, what little tools can we give people for them to help to reframe their own thoughts along those lines? That's one of the things that we can introduce people to that's affected us on our own tools, on how we've done that to a large extent. One little hint that I'd want to put out there right now is, I just did this with a guy. I had to have an Uber ride today for the first time ever. I had my car having some stuff done to it pretty far away from here, my new car. And at first this guy was kind of shy, and I think it was a racial thing. He felt funny about me in his car, and I think he was new to all this and whatnot. So one of the things I've learned to do is find some common ground real fast. Get into a conversation and find some common ground. What is it? Is it music? Is it food? Because I noticed that a lot of these kids that I mentioned last time that talk to each other internationally across countries a lot, language can be a big one, if you speak the other person's language. But here we already spoke the same language, this guy. But there's the other languages, there's the language of music, there's the language of maybe sports or whatever, and you find some common ground. And then what I do when I get into that situation and I see this person start to light up and start to loosen up, one of the things I do through my speech and my questions that I ask is I keep trying to find more and more common ground. Not differences, but more and more common ground. And then you start pulling that into the conversation. And by the time you spent 20 minutes with some stranger in the car, more than anything, they see the connections and the commonalities, not the differences. So I think the more that it's a oversimplified kind of way to frame things, but I think the more people think like that, that they try to go there with others and open these new doors, and then maybe point it out at some point in the conversation. You realize how many similarities there are. We're all just people.
Yeah,
We're too
yeah,
focused on the differences, not on the commonalities, because well, the news does that to us for one thing, because that's what sells. Well, we could say sells newspapers, but that's a kind of a complicated thing to say these days, the way that works. But you see my point.
hmm yeah, yeah. So yeah, that point really integrates too in terms of the principle of one. The ideal of oneness, because
Yes.
the only reason we don't have that ideal more relevant today is that we're programmed by the establishment of the overall media and the cultures to be separate.
Yeah.
We think that the Russians are different people, the Belgians are different people, the Swedish, the Africans are different people. We see these travel logs now on YouTube where people are traveling around different parts of the world. They're either sampling the real estate, the infrastructure, the opportunities,
Yeah.
or also the food. The food is a very fun thing
Yes.
because you're really more hospitable, you're more friendly in terms of sharing and so forth. And they're going around saying, "Oh, these people have wonderful cuisines. They have wonderful ways that they fix, they cook their rice and prepare their meals. And even though some of the meals may be full of starch or fat, people are still happy. And people don't realize yet how much happiness has to do in terms of your health. Sometimes you may
Mhm.
have someone a diet oversaturated in fats, but if you have a happy environment, you know, sometimes they have more longevity than
Sure.
someone who eat so-called healthy diet. But the fact is that they're exposing themselves so much variety that it breaks that fear, you know.
Xenophobia or xenophobia, depending on who you're talking to, on how, that's that fear of the fear of others, the fear of unknown. That's why, I harp on this every time we talk about. It's one of the wonderful things about the internet. And there's all these platforms like Omegle and Ome TV, and these things they're geared for this. You've got you've got a lot of the international community, particularly a lot of Chinese kids, Indonesians that want to practice their English. So they get on there and they just go boop, boop. They start looking for people in UK, Australia, the US, New Zealand, everywhere they can find people that are known to speak a lot of English, so they can practice English, and then that's attracting the other kids who are learning, Indonesian and Chinese and French and Italian, and this stuff's flying all over the place, and it's
Yeah,
hilarious. And what you just said is one of the first things that comes up is food, you know, and like I did with this guy today, something told me music, and when I mentioned music, that guy lit up because turns out he's a piano player and a bass player, and then one thing led to another, and I always take opportunities like that to interject microcosms of cooperation. I happened to mention to him a Jamaican couple that I'm friends with that moved here to St. Louis from Austria a little over a year ago. And then I got to tell him my funny stories about being in Jamaica many years ago. So we all connected on that level. And now they just went to Ghana. They're living in Ghana doing a big music project there. Turns out the guy was in Ziggy Marley's band for some years, a long time ago. And we just clicked when I first met these people. So now we stay in touch, and now they're like, "Oh, you got to come to Ghana. We're going to get you a girlfriend over here. There's some great women." And